Hey, how's it going and welcome to another video. Alright, so today I figured we could talk about a topic that I'm sure is very near and dear to the hearts of pretty much anybody who, consumes media. Whether that's anime or video games or manga or TV show, the concept of dropping a show I think is pretty ubiquitous. Dropping something, for anybody who doesn't know, basically just means you've given up on a series or you don't have any more interest in it, so you've just decided to not continue with it. And I think it is a kind of interesting thing to think about because there is definitely a discussion that can be had about media consumption and how much of a thing you have to consume before you're able to form a genuine opinion on it. I think for something like a movie, you can make a genuine case that in order to critique a movie, you have to have seen the whole movie. But for things like, anime, video games, manga that tend to have a way longer runtime, it gets a little bit more dicey. Assuming I have a 900-hour video game and I've played 50 hours of it, is it fair for me to say that the game sucks? If I read one chapter of a 10-chapter manga and say it sucks, is that fair? So I think there's a lot of just kind of interesting philosophical sort of discussions you can have about this kind of stuff, but at least for me, it's always a very difficult decision to have to be I am done with this thing completely and not finish it. Because I'm very much somebody who's very experience-minded. I think it's kind of a sort of mission in my life to consume as much media as possible. I'm not doing anything else of value. Might as well, right? But I definitely do kind of dread the idea of having a particular creation and just saying, no, I will no longer be experiencing the rest of this. And I think we've all kind of been there. I would be very, very surprised if there's any person watching who has, completed every single, anime or game or whatever they've started. Or somebody who has never made the conscious decision to be okay, I will no longer be watching any more of this. And a lot of people, I think, are definitely a lot more kind of, loosey-goosey about dropping certain things. Some people, they'll drop a show if they don't like it within the first 20 seconds. I'm the kind of dude who's I've hated this for 20 episodes, but maybe episode 21 will be better, and that's a sort of topic I'll get into later, but it's very difficult to kind of set a bar for, when it's sort of quote-unquote acceptable to drop a thing. I think the most common sort of thing you'll see is, the 3-episode rule. Which basically goes, if you don't like something within the first 3 episodes, then it's probably not for you and it's fair to move on. But I think all things in life, there is a little bit of wiggle room, because there's always, exceptions. Maybe a show just has a really, really slow start. The first 3 episodes are purely build up, and then things start to get good episode 4 and beyond. And with video games, I don't even know how you go about that. I've never heard of a 2-hour rule or something like that. And I've never really been a person who really adheres myself to that. I'm if episode 3 I'm still not really feeling it, I think I'll truck on a little bit longer. But like I said, mentally, I don't think I ever, almost never consider a thing to be truly dropped. I pretty much always decide that I'm just putting it on hold. And, there's been games and anime and stuff that I've had on hold for literally years and years and years. And sometimes they just never get finished. Sometimes they do, 10 years later. Yakuza 0, for example, that's been a game that's been on hold for years and years at this point. Another thing I figured I should mention, this is a massive pet peeve of mine, is whenever people, drop a thing because others tell them that it gets bad later. I think this is something you especially see a lot with, long-running anime or manga or whatever, is there's that one arc, and people are yeah, just stop reading at that point. Beyond just the idea of dropping something, I think that's something that kind of drives me crazy, is whenever people are yeah, just don't do this thing. Just don't experience it. Just don't make up your own opinions on stuff. No, fuck that. I mentioned this in a previous video I did, talking about, what you do if you really like something that's really unpopular, but sometimes things just kind of end up in this, negativity death spiral where it is perceived of as being bad, and therefore people go around telling others that it's bad, and then new people don't try it. So yeah, if you're getting into a thing and a friend of yours or whatever is you know what, chapter 430, stop reading there. I know there's another 500 chapters left, but that's where the series really ends. just keep going, dude. Like, even if they're right, wouldn't you rather have the satisfaction of, like, agreeing with yourself and realizing, oh yeah, it is actually shitty, instead of it just being this ethereal concept that you may or may not actually agree with? So yeah, just kind of be wary of the drop it here, folks. Form your own opinions about things. But at least for me, I think the only two reasons when I ever really, like, just give up on a thing is when it causes me active frustration to play it or watch it or whatever, or when I care about nothing in it. Usually, I'm the kind of person who, no matter what it is, I can kind of find something to, like, leech onto and find enjoyment out of it. Whether that's like, oh, there's this one character that I really like and it makes me so happy when they show up, or the story is just really interesting, or it has good fights, or it's visually, like, really cool, or just the gameplay or the combat is really fun, or something. I can find something to sit there and say, like, yeah, I like that. So for me, at least, it is a very catastrophically bad sign if I cannot find anything in a thing to like. And relating back to what I was talking about earlier, it's always hard to sit there and say, all right, if we've reached this point, I don't think there's not going to be anything going forward that will show up, because you never really know, right? You know, if you're 50 hours into an 80-hour game, it's like, that's still 30 hours left of possible stuff that can still show up. Something in that might change your mind, right? And in cases like that, I kind of stop and think, do I care at all about knowing what happens here? Because it is a very uncommon occurrence for me to just, like, have zero interest whatsoever in the outcome of a particular thing that I've started. You know, like, I at least want to know kind of what happens throughout it. So if I encounter something where it's like, I don't like any of these characters, I don't care if in the next episode of the show a fucking mega ultra nuke goes off and just everybody dies, if I sat there and I was like, okay, that's probably a bad sign. And the other one is just, if the thing causes you, like, active irritation or frustration while you're playing it or watching it, then it's probably best to just drop it. Like, if you're playing a game and the entire combat system you just find utterly and completely revolting, then at that point, maybe you should just drop it. And sometimes it's like, there's certain things about it that you do enjoy, but there's other stuff that's just so horrifically, like, infuriating that it makes the rest of it seem not as good in comparison. At that point, I think you kind of just have to weigh out your options and be like, can I put up with this thing that I hate in pursuit of seeing more of the thing that I like? And I think that's something you kind of have to decide for yourself. But yeah, I think it really is ultimately kind of up to you to decide your own sort of metric for when you drop a thing, because obviously there's always exceptions to everything. The 3-episode rule is probably not going to apply to literally everything. But I think as long as you feel like you gave it an honest shake, then it's probably fine to be like, yeah, this is just not for me. But that really just depends on your kind of tolerance for things. For some people, like, giving a 100-episode series 80 episodes, like, that's fair. And for some people, within 2 minutes of watching a show deciding it's bad, that's fair for them. Even if I would say that's a little bit loony, but... And I don't really think there's any shame in asking friends, like, hey man, I've been playing this thing, I know you really like it, I'm at this part, and it's not really doing anything for me. Like, is it worth continuing? Because there's a pretty good chance that they know you pretty well and the kind of stuff that you like and don't like. And they're probably willing to give a pretty fair assessment of, like, if it's okay to say, alright, I'm giving up or not. Cumdick69 in the public Discord server you're in is probably not the best source of information. Cumdick69 is probably the kind of dude who's going to tell you to start at JoJo Part 6. Like, but yeah, sadly, I'm not a wizard. I don't have omnipotent fiction powers. And, you know, I think it really is ultimately up to you to decide, like, when you've kind of reached your limit for something. I think that's kind of, like, a good approach to go with is when you feel like you've reached your limit, at that point, it's probably fine to be like, I'm going to move on to other things. But I think it's also important to remember that just because you've dropped something, that doesn't mean that the thing just, like, no longer exists anymore. You know, uninstalling something from Steam doesn't mean that you've banished it into a black hole or something. The thing is still there. You can always go back to it. And, you know, people change over time. Like, right now, you might think this is the worst thing ever, but, you know, give it a few years, maybe you'll come back to it and think, oh, wait, this is actually just a wonderful bit of schlock. Or, man, a few years ago, I thought that story was really boring, but now I'm, like, super into it. Or, you know, just, these kinds of things happen. People change bit by bit over the years. You know, Final Fantasy XIV, for example, is a game that I first tried years and years and years ago, and it just didn't do anything for me, but last year I got into it and it became, I think, like my most played game ever. So don't be afraid to give things another try. Like, literally all you have to lose is maybe a little bit of your time. If you go back to it a few years later and it's still kind of shitty, then it's like, yeah, nothing's changed. But if you start to enjoy it more, then it's like, hell yeah. Yeah, there's no permanence to it. It's not like getting a fucking tattoo or whatever. Like, that thing will always be around if you want to give it another shot. But yeah, that has been the video. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.